Sergeant Daniel Carter groaned as he crawled out of the wreckage of his crashed escape pod. His head throbbed, and his arms were covered in cuts. Smoke rose from the twisted metal around him, the remains of his ship scattered across the alien jungle. The battle had gone horribly wrong. The humans were outnumbered, and their fleet had been forced to retreat. His ship was hit, and now he was stranded on an unknown world. He checked his gear. His rifle was broken, his communicator was dead, and he had only a small knife for protection. The planet's sky was a deep shade of purple, and strange blue-leaf trees stretched high above him. In the distance, he could hear strange animal cries. Then he heard something worse. Heavy footsteps, not just one or two, but many. Daniel hid behind a fallen tree, holding his breath. The footsteps grew louder, and soon he saw them. Scifi warriors. The Scifi were feared across the galaxy, 8 feet tall, covered in dark metallic scales, and built like living tanks. They were one of the strongest warrior races, and humans barely stood a chance against them in close combat. Daniel knew running would be useless. He was injured, and they were faster. His only option was to fight, even if he had no chance of winning. He tightened his grip on his knife and prepared to attack. But before he could move, something hit him from behind. A sharp electric shock surged through his body. His muscles locked up, and he collapsed to the ground. The last thing he saw before passing out was a pair of glowing golden eyes staring down at him. Daniel woke up in chains. His arms were shackled behind his back, and his legs were bound together. He was inside a massive stone chamber with torches lighting the walls. The air smelled strange, like burning incense mixed with something metallic. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and that's when he saw her. Sitting on an elevated throne, surrounded by guards, was the most beautiful yet terrifying Scifi he had ever seen. She had the same dark metallic scales as the others, but her features were more refined, almost elegant. Her glowing golden eyes watched him with curiosity rather than cruelty. A long flowing cape of deep crimson rested on her shoulders, and a sharp silver crown sat atop her head. She wasn't just any Scifi. She was their princess. Daniel clenched his jaw. If the Scifi had a princess, that meant he wasn't in just any part of their empire. He was inside their royal stronghold. That was very bad news. The princess leaned forward, her voice smooth but commanding. "You are a human soldier," she said, as if she were studying a strange new creature. "You fought well in space, but your ship fell. Now you are in my domain." Daniel didn't respond. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing his fear. She smiled, revealing sharp canines. "I have heard stories about humans. Some say you are weak, fragile things that break easily. Others say you are surprisingly resilient." She stood up and walked down the steps toward him. Her towering form made him feel small, but he refused to look away. "My people tell stories of your kind," she continued. "They say that humans believe we eat our prisoners." Daniel tensed. He had heard those rumors. The Scifi were carnivorous, and humans assumed the worst about them. The princess tilted her head, as if reading his thoughts. Then she laughed. "Oh, little human," she whispered, leaning closer. "Do you really think I brought you here for food?" Daniel didn't answer, but inside, his heart was pounding. If she didn't bring him here to be eaten, then why was he still alive? Daniel Carter sat in chains, his back straight, and his eyes locked on the Scifi princess standing before him. His body still ached from the electric shock, but his mind was racing. The princess had just laughed at the idea that he would be eaten. So if she didn't bring him here for food, then why was he still alive? The princess's golden eyes gleamed as she studied him. "I have seen many warriors, human," she said, circling him slowly. "Most scream, beg, or break under pressure. But you," she leaned in slightly, her voice lower, "you do not fear so easily." Daniel didn't respond. He knew better than to let his guard down. If she wanted something from him, She wouldn't get it easily. The princess smirked, as if she could hear his thoughts. She turned and walked toward a massive throne at the end of the room, her long cape flowing behind her. She sat down gracefully, resting her chin on her hand. I am Princess Felix of the Scifi Empire. And you, human, have my attention. Daniel clenched his fists behind his back. What do you want from me? He asked, keeping his voice steady. Felix's smile deepened. I should be asking you that. You are the one who fell from the sky, right into my hands. She gestured to the guards at the side of the room. My warriors wanted to dispose of you, but I decided otherwise. You interest me. Daniel narrowed his eyes. I'm not here to entertain you. Felix chuckled. Oh, I disagree. She stood up again, walking toward him slowly. Tell me, human, do you know what the Scifi respect most? Daniel didn't answer, but he already had an idea. Strength, she said, answering her own question. We are warriors. We conquer, we fight, and we survive. But strength is not just about brute force. She looked him over with intrigue. I saw your battle in space. You fought against impossible odds, yet you refused to surrender. Even now, in chains, you do not beg or break. She knelt slightly so that they were at eye level. That is what interests me. Daniel held her gaze, refusing to flinch. If you respect strength so much, then why am I still a prisoner? He asked. Felix's expression didn't change. Because you have not proven yourself yet. Daniel frowned. Proven myself. She stood up straight again and motioned toward the guards. 2 Scifi warriors stepped forward, unlocking his chains. The heavy metal restraints clanked to the floor, and Daniel rubbed his wrists, feeling a slight relief. But his relief didn't last long. The princess turned to him with a challenging smile. You will fight, she said simply. Daniel's muscles tensed. Fight who? Felix's smile widened. Not who. What? The doors to the chamber opened, and Daniel was led down a long corridor. His instincts told him this wasn't just a normal fight. This was some kind of test. The Scifi respected strength. If he failed, they would probably kill him. The corridor opened into a massive arena. The ground was hard stone, surrounded by towering walls with Scifi warriors watching from above. The sky above was a deep purple, and the air smelled like dust and blood. Felix appeared on a high platform overlooking the arena. Human, her voice echoed through the space. This is your chance. Show me your strength. A massive metal gate on the other side of the arena rumbled open. Daniel took a deep breath and turned toward the sound. A low growl echoed from the darkness inside the gate. Then it stepped out. A monstrous, four-legged beast covered in thick, dark scales. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Daniel, and its sharp claws scraped against the stone. It was twice his size. The crowd of Scifi warriors roared in excitement. Daniel exhaled. Of course, it's a monster. The beast lunged. Daniel dodged to the side just in time, barely avoiding the creature's razor-sharp claws. He rolled across the stone and quickly got to his feet. He had no weapons, no armor, just his instincts and whatever he could use from the environment. The beast snarled and lunged again. Daniel ducked, this time grabbing a loose rock from the ground and smashing it against the creature's eye. The beast howled in pain, shaking its head violently. The Scifi warriors cheered, entertained by the struggle. Up on the platform, Felix watched with keen interest. She had expected the human to try to run, or at least hesitate in fear. But instead, he was adapting. Daniel knew he couldn't take the beast head-on. It was stronger and faster, but he was smarter. He needed to outthink it. He noticed the ground was cracked in places. Some of the stone slabs were loose. That was his chance. He ran toward the weakest part of the floor, making sure the beast chased him. As expected, the massive creature charged at full speed. At the last second, Daniel jumped aside. The beast's weight slammed onto the weak stone, and the ground collapsed beneath it. The beast fell into the pit below, roaring as it disappeared from sight. Dust and debris filled the air. The arena fell silent. Then, after a long moment, cheering erupted from the HFY warriors above. Daniel stood there, panting. He had won. Up on the platform, Valak smiled. But this time, it was not amusement. It was something else. She leaned forward, her golden eyes gleaming. Perhaps humans are more interesting than I thought. Daniel stood in the middle of the dusty arena, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. The fallen beast's growls had faded into silence below, leaving only the roaring cheers of the HFY warriors above. He had won. Against all odds, he had survived. Up on the royal platform, Princess Valak leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand as she studied him. The amusement in her eyes had turned into something else, genuine interest. The arena's main gate creaked open, and two heavily armored HFY guards marched in. Daniel tensed, expecting another fight, but they simply stood before him, waiting. Then Valak spoke. "Bring him to me." Daniel glanced around. He had no choice but to comply. Without resistance, he let the guards escort him back through the corridor, their heavy footsteps echoing against the stone walls. When the doors of the throne chamber opened again, he found himself standing before the princess once more. Unlike before, he was no longer in chains. Valak stepped down from her throne, approaching him slowly. There was no hostility in her movements. Instead, there was something curious. "You have surprised me, human," she said, circling him like a predator observing its prey. "Most who enter that arena never leave." Daniel stayed silent. He wasn't sure if she expected gratitude or a challenge. Valak smirked. "Tell me, Daniel Carter, what drives you?" He blinked. It was the first time she had used his name. "I fight to survive," he answered simply. She tilted her head. "Survival is not enough. Even the weakest creatures struggle to survive. But you," her eyes glowed softly, "you think, you adapt. That is rare." Daniel clenched his fists. "What do you want from me?" Valak studied him for a long moment before finally answering. "I want to understand humans." Daniel frowned. "Why?" The princess walked to a nearby table and picked up a delicate silver goblet. "The HFY Empire has conquered many worlds. We have fought countless species, broken their spirits, and bent them to our will. But humans—" She took a slow sip of her drink before turning back to him. "Humans do not break so easily." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had heard stories about the HFY, how they expanded their empire, crushing anything in their way. If they were interested in humanity now, it could only mean one thing. "You're planning to invade Earth." Valak's expression didn't change. She placed the goblet down and slowly walked toward him. "Perhaps. Perhaps not." Daniel exhaled sharply. He needed to be careful. If she saw humans as a threat, she might order an attack. If she saw them as weak, she would conquer them without hesitation. He had to make sure neither happened. "You said the HFY respects strength," he said, choosing his words carefully. "If that's true, then you know humans won't bow to you." Valak smiled, but it wasn't condescending this time. It was intrigued. "Good," she murmured. "I would hate for it to be easy." The doors opened again, and a figure entered, a HFY warrior in dark red armor. He stepped forward and knelt before the princess. "Your Highness," he said, his voice deep and respectful, "the council requests your presence. There is a matter concerning the warfront." Valak sighed, then turned back to Daniel. "It seems I am needed elsewhere." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Stay here. Rest. You have earned it." Daniel didn't reply. He watched as she and the warrior left the chamber, the doors closing behind them. For the first time since he was captured, he was alone. He looked around the grand throne room. Guards still stood at their posts, watching him carefully, but no one stopped him as he walked toward the large balcony. From there, he could see the vast Scifi capital city, a sprawling metropolis of towering buildings, glowing energy lines, and massive warships in the sky, the heart of the Scifi Empire. And right now, he was trapped in it. He clenched his fists. He needed a plan. But first, he needed to understand why the princess was so interested in him, and why, for some reason, she hadn't killed him yet. Daniel stood on the grand balcony, staring at the massive Scifi city stretching beyond the palace. The sight was overwhelming. Towers of dark metal, glowing sky bridges, and warships patrolling the skies like silent predators. This was the heart of the empire, and he was a prisoner at its center. But something didn't add up. He had been captured, thrown into an arena to die, and now he was being treated with respect. Why? A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're not trying to escape, are you?" Daniel turned. Princess Valix stood behind him, arms crossed, amusement glinting in her golden eyes. She was no longer in her battle armor. Instead, she wore a flowing deep blue robe lined with silver, making her seem less like a warrior, more like a ruler. Daniel sighed. Would that even be possible? He motioned toward the city below. Even if I get out of the palace, where would I go? Valix chuckled. Exactly. You are in the heart of my empire, Daniel Carter. No one has ever escaped from here. Daniel studied her carefully. Then why am I still alive? The princess tilted her head. Because you interest me. Daniel frowned. You keep saying that. But what does that mean? Valix walked to the balcony edge, looking down at her city. The Scifi have fought many species. We always win. They surrender, they obey, they fear us. She turned to him. But humans are different. Daniel remained silent. Valix continued. Your kind refuses to break, even when outmatched, even when facing certain death. Instead of surrendering, you fight harder. I have studied your wars, your history. Your people are stubborn. Daniel smirked. That's one way to describe us. The princess grinned. It is an admirable trait, but also a dangerous one. Daniel crossed his arms. So what now? Are you keeping me as a prisoner? A test subject? Valix shook her head. No, I want to understand you. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I want to know how a single human, alone and surrounded, still refuses to submit. Daniel met her gaze. There was no cruelty in her eyes, no malice, only curiosity. He exhaled. If you really want to understand humans, here's the truth. We fight because we believe in something. In our people, in our freedom. He clenched his fists. We fight because surrender is worse than death. Valix studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. Good, she whispered. That is what I wanted to hear. Before Daniel could respond, the doors to the throne room slammed open. A towering Scifi warrior in blood-red armor stormed in, his reptilian features twisted in rage. His voice boomed through the chamber. Princess, what is this human still doing here? Valix turned calmly. General Vornar, she greeted, her tone cool. Why are you here? Vornar's glowing yellow eyes locked onto Daniel. This creature is an enemy of the Empire. He should have been executed. Daniel tensed. Vornar was no ordinary soldier. His armor bore the insignia of a war commander, and judging by the way the guard stiffened, he was someone powerful. Valix sighed. He is under my protection. Vornar scowled. Your Highness, this is foolish. This human is dangerous. Valix smirked. I know. That is why he is interesting. Vornar took a step closer. His massive frame made Daniel feel small. This is not a game. You are the future ruler of the Scifi. You cannot waste time on a mere human. Valix's expression darkened. I do not take orders from you, General. The tension in the room thickened. The guards gripped their weapons as Vornar's fists clenched. Then, without warning, the general turned to Daniel. "If you truly think humans are strong, then prove it," he growled. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you want me to do that?" Vorner smirked. "A duel." Silence. Daniel blinked. "You want me to fight you?" Vorner laughed. "I could crush you in a second, human." His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "No, you will fight one of my warriors. If you survive, then perhaps I will reconsider my opinion of your kind." Daniel exhaled. This was bad. If he refused, he would be seen as weak. If he accepted, he could die. Before he could respond, Valix spoke first. "Fine," she said, surprising both of them. She turned to Daniel. "You will fight, but I will choose your opponent." Vorner scowled. "You have no right." "I have every right," she snapped. "This is my decision. And if you disagree, General, you are welcome to challenge me instead." Vorner's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Even he knew better than to challenge the princess directly. Valix turned back to Daniel. "Rest tonight. The duel will happen tomorrow." Daniel swallowed hard. There was no way out of this now. As the guards led him away, Valix watched him go. There was something in her eyes. Not amusement this time. Something closer to concern. Daniel sat on the cold stone bench in his chamber, stretching his sore muscles. His heart was steady, but he knew what was coming. A duel. A fight against an alien warrior. He had fought in battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humans were not weak. A soft knock at the door made him look up. Princess Valix entered, wearing her royal battle attire. A dark blue bodysuit with silver armor pieces covering her arms and shoulders. Her expression was unreadable as she approached. "Are you ready?" she asked. Daniel smirked. "Is that a trick question?" Valix sighed. "I had no choice. If I refused, General Vornar would have used it as an excuse to challenge my authority." Daniel nodded. He had already figured that out. "And who am I fighting?" Valix hesitated before answering. "My royal champion." Daniel blinked. "Wait. What?" Valix folded her arms. "I had to make sure you had a chance. If I let Vornar choose, you would have been torn apart in seconds." Daniel exhaled. "And your champion is the easier choice." A small smile appeared on her lips. "Let's just say he values skill over brute strength. If you fight well, you might survive." Daniel stood, rolling his shoulders. "Great. No pressure, right?" Valix's smile faded. "Daniel, listen to me. Scifi duels are not like human fights. There are no rounds, no breaks. It ends when one of you can no longer stand." Daniel nodded. He had expected as much. Valix studied him for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, she said, "I don't want you to die." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That almost sounds like concern, Princess." She looked away. "I do not waste time on weaklings." Then, without another word, she turned and left. Daniel couldn't help but smirk. Was she worried about him? The arena. The arena was massive. A circular battlefield surrounded by thousands of Scifi spectators. The stands were filled with warriors, nobles, and even Vornar himself, standing tall with his arms crossed. Daniel stepped onto the sand-covered floor, the heat from the twin suns burning against his skin. Across from him stood his opponent, the champion. Daniel had expected some massive, monstrous alien, but instead, the Scifi champion was lean, fast-looking, and covered in flexible silver armor. His reptilian features were calm, and in his hands he held two curved blades. Daniel's weapon, a single combat knife. He gritted his teeth. Well, this was going to be fun. From the royal balcony, Valix raised her hand. "Begin." The champion moved first. In the blink of an eye, he lunged forward, his twin blades flashing in the sunlight. Daniel barely dodged, rolling to the side. The champion's strikes were fast, precise, and merciless. Daniel knew one thing. He couldn't fight this like a normal battle. Strength wouldn't help him here. Speed and strategy would. The Xilari warrior attacked again. Daniel ducked, barely avoiding a slash aimed at his throat. He twisted, swinging his knife, but the champion blocked it effortlessly. The crowd roared with excitement. Vornar watched with a smug grin. "He won't last long," he muttered. But Valix remained silent, her eyes locked on the fight. Daniel was already breathing hard. His opponent was too fast, too skilled. But then, he noticed something. A pattern. Every time the champion attacked, he favored his left side. A small weakness. Daniel smiled. That's it. The champion lunged again, aiming for Daniel's chest. But this time, Daniel didn't dodge. Instead, he sidestepped at the last second, and as the warrior overextended, Daniel slammed his elbow into the champion's ribs. The Xilari warrior staggered back. The crowd gasped. Vornar's eyes narrowed. Valix's lips curved into a small smile. The champion quickly recovered, circling Daniel. Now the fight had changed. Daniel wasn't just running anymore. He was adapting, learning, just like a human. The champion attacked again. Daniel ducked under the strike, moving faster than before. He slashed with his knife, cutting across the Xilari's armor. The crowd exploded with cheers. Vornar clenched his fists. Impossible. The champion paused, studying Daniel. Then, to Daniel's surprise, he nodded in respect. For the first time, the fight felt even. Daniel grinned. "Let's finish this." The arena was silent. The crowd held its breath, watching the two warriors locked in battle. Daniel had done the impossible. He had wounded the Xilari champion. But the fight was far from over. The Xilari champion stood tall, his silver armor scratched but unbroken. He studied Daniel with sharp reptilian eyes, acknowledging his skill. "You fight well, human," the champion said in a deep voice. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow and smirked. "You're not too bad yourself." The champion twirled his curved blades. "But I cannot lose. I am the royal champion." Daniel rolled his shoulders, gripping his combat knife tighter. "And I'm just a soldier who doesn't know when to quit." The crowd erupted as the champion lunged again. Faster, stronger, more precise. His movements were no longer cautious. He was now fighting at full strength. Daniel barely dodged the first strike. The second cut his shoulder. Pain shot through his arm, but he gritted his teeth. He couldn't afford to slow down. Watching from above, Princess Valix sat in her royal seat, eyes locked on the fight. Around her, the nobles murmured in shock. "No human should be able to last this long," one of them whispered. "This is unheard of," another muttered. But Valix knew this was no ordinary human. She leaned forward, gripping the armrest. Daniel was learning, adapting. Each time the champion attacked, Daniel moved a little faster, reacted a little smarter. Vornar, standing nearby, scowled. He did not like this. The final clash. Daniel's breathing was heavy. His body ached, but his mind was sharp. He had found a weakness, a slight delay in the champion's recovery after each heavy attack. He could use it. The champion struck again, a powerful downward slash. Instead of dodging, Daniel stepped forward. The blade missed by inches, crashing into the sand. The champion was off balance. Daniel didn't waste the moment. He slammed his knee into the Xilari's stomach, then twisted, driving his elbow into the alien's side. The champion stumbled. The crowd gasped. Vornar's expression turned to rage. Daniel took a deep breath. One final move. He spun around the champion, gripping his combat knife with both hands, and slammed the hilt against the back of the Xilari's head. The champion fell to his knees. A moment of silence. Then he collapsed, unconscious. The arena exploded with noise. The aftermath. Vornar's face twisted with fury. Impossible, he shouted, slamming his fist on the balcony railing. Valix, however, smiled. Daniel had won. She stood up, raising her hand. The crowd fell silent. The human has proven his strength, she declared. The duel is over. The Xilari warriors exchanged uncertain looks. Vornar clenched his jaw. He knew he had lost today. But his rage was not over. Valix walked down to the arena. Daniel was breathing hard, sweat dripping from his face. His arm bled, but he was smiling. "You fought well," she said, her voice softer than before. Daniel chuckled. "I try my best." She extended a hand. After a brief hesitation, he took it. The crowd cheered. But Daniel knew one thing for sure. This was not the end. Something bigger was coming. The cheers of the arena still echoed as Daniel stood victorious. The Xilari champion lay unconscious on the sand, and the alien crowd had erupted in awe. Princess Valix turned toward Daniel, her golden eyes shining with something unreadable. "You have done what no other human has ever done." Daniel smirked, still catching his breath. "I tend to surprise people." But before he could enjoy his victory, a deep voice cut through the noise. "This fight means nothing." All eyes turned to Vornar. The Xilari noble descended from the royal balcony, his eyes burning with fury. "He is just one human. One victory does not make him our equal." Vornar roared. Daniel sighed, rolling his sore shoulder. "You really don't know when to quit." Vornar pointed a sharp claw at him. "This fight was for entertainment, but the fate of our people cannot be decided in an arena." His gaze turned to Valix. "Princess, you know this. A warrior like him, like any human, cannot be trusted." Valix's face remained calm, but Daniel could see she was thinking fast. She turned to Daniel. "You have won the right to speak. Tell us, human, why should my people respect you?" Daniel looked at the gathered Xilari. The crowd that once saw him as nothing but an outsider now waited for his words. He took a deep breath. "I didn't fight to prove humans are better," he said, voice steady. "I fought to show that we are not weak, that we are not prey, that we don't just survive. We fight, we learn, and we stand up for ourselves." The Xilari murmured among themselves. Daniel stepped forward, locking eyes with Valix. "You have a choice," he continued. "You can listen to men like Vornar, who tell you to fear humans, or you can look at what's in front of you. I came here as a prisoner. I stood in this arena alone. And yet, I survived. I fought. I earned my place." Silence fell. Valix's expression softened. Then she turned to Vornar. "You speak of trust," she said, voice firm. "Yet, I have seen more honor in this human than in you." Vornar's eyes widened in rage. "You dare?" "I do." Vornar growled, then drew his blade. "Then you are a fool. This is not over." He lunged at the princess. But Daniel was faster. With a burst of energy, he threw himself in front of her, raising his knife. Clang! Vornar's blade met Daniel's in a fierce clash. The impact sent a shock through Daniel's arm, but he held firm. Valix stepped back as the two men faced each other. The crowd gasped. This was no longer a duel. This was treason. Vornar slashed again, his attacks fueled by anger. But Daniel was no longer fighting to survive. He was fighting to protect. Dodge. Counter. Strike. Their blades danced in the firelight. Vornar was strong, but his rage made him reckless. Daniel saw an opening. With a final step he dodged, grabbed Vornar's wrist, and twisted. Crack. Vornar howled in pain as his weapon clattered to the ground. Daniel pressed his knife to the noble's throat. The arena fell into absolute silence. Vornar panted, eyes wide with fear. Daniel leaned closer, voice low. "You lose." The Xilari guards rushed forward, grabbing Vornar and dragging him away. He thrashed but could do nothing. Valix took a deep breath, then turned to the crowd. "Let it be known," she declared, her voice ringing across the arena. that the human Daniel is no longer a prisoner. He is an honored warrior. The Xelari erupted in cheers. Daniel lowered his knife, exhaling deeply. It was over. He had won, not just the fight, but their respect. Valak stepped beside him. "You saved my life." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, well, I guess I like to make things interesting." She smiled. "Then perhaps you should stay and see just how interesting our world can be." Daniel looked around at the alien city, the people, the possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth staying for.